So I've never been much of a batik person, but this particular collection made me change my mind about batiks. Hi, I'm Carol from Segovia Quilts, and I've decided to tackle a batik quilt. So I've never worked with batiks for an entire quilt before. I've done a little bit of batik work here and there, like including a block with batik fabric in another quilt, but I've never done one pretty much entirely out of batiks. But I saw this particular collection and then I found the perfect pattern, well actually two patterns, to do with this fabric. So the collection that I've decided to use for my next project is called Sorbet Sundaes, and it's by Riley Blake Designs. So if you've never worked with batiks before, they're not made the same way as like regular quilting fabric is. So the designs that you can do with it, I mean, are incredible. It's very, very unique fabric. You're never going to get any piece of yardage or anything like that that matches another piece of yardage. It's all going to be different, and it's hand done. This particular collection was done by artisans in Indonesia. So as I mentioned earlier, I've picked out two patterns to use this fabric with, and I've picked out two for kind of one reason. So when I get my fabric from Riley Blake Designs, I don't get it in pre-cuts, I get it in yardage. So I ordered half-yard cuts from 15 prints from the Sorbet Sundaes collection, and my intention is to essentially cut each half yard into a fat quarter. So I'm going to cut them in half, and then I'm going to use one fat quarter for one pattern and then the other fat quarter for the other pattern. So the first pattern that I'm going to be doing is called Squared Up, and it's by Cotton and Joy. So I've actually had my eye on this pattern for a really long time, but I hadn't really found like the perfect fabric collection to do this pattern with until I saw this one, this Batiks collection, the Sorbet Sundaes collection, and I thought it would be perfect for this pattern. So this is a pattern we're going to be making today, and I am going to be doing the throw size. This pattern is actually available in a couple of different sizes, so you can do it in a baby size, throw size, twin size, or queen size. So again, I'm going to be doing the throw size today. So if you look at the pictures on the front, it has two quilt examples. So this one back here is the throw size, and this is the scrappy version. This one right here is the baby size, and this is in an ombre style or a solids style. So I'm going to do the scrappy version of this in a throw size. So for the scrappy version, it requires 30 10-inch squares. So again, I've selected 15 prints from this collection, so I'm going to do two 10-inch squares from each print. So that'll give me my 30 10-inch squares that I need to do the scrappy throw size. And then I'll also need 2 yards of background fabric. So for my background fabric, I am just going to be using Riley White. And then I also need 4 yards for my backing fabric. Again, for that, I'm going to be using Riley White. And then for my binding fabric, I need a half yard, and I will be using another print from the Sorbet Sundaes collection. So the binding is going to be this beautiful blue here, and it might be hard to tell in the camera, but there is definitely a design in it. And again, I'll zoom in and show you all the fabric that we're going to be using. So this is a pattern we're going to be making today. So before I do any cutting, I'm going to go ahead and show you all the fabric that I've selected. And again, I will have the SKU number listed down below. So if you absolutely love the prints that I've selected for this pattern, you have the information to go ahead and get that same print for yourself. so I went ahead and I cut my yardage in half so that I would have 2 fat quarters from each of my 15 prints. And then once I cut them in half, I went ahead and ironed everything so everything was nice and flat. And then I went ahead and cut out my pieces for my blocks. So I ironed all of my printed fabric, and then I also ironed my background fabric, and then I cut all of the pieces that I needed from that. For the number of prints that I was using and the size of this quilt that I'm doing, which is the throw size, I only needed 2 10 by 10 inch squares from each fat quarter. So that left me with this amount of fabric left over. So you figure each fat quarter is about 21 by 18. So I only needed 2 10 by 10 squares. So that leaves me with about 8 inches this way by 21 inches this way. So you'll still have a decent amount left over where you could make something else like a coordinating pillow, or you could even use this to do your binding for the quilt when it's done. So yeah, so you'll have a decent amount left over if you start with fat quarters. If you're using a 10 by 10 inch pre-cut, then you won't have any leftover fabric like this. But if you are using a pre-cut stack of 10 by 10s, normally they come with 42 10 by 10 inch squares. For the throw size, you only need 30 squares. So again, you'll still have 12 squares left over where you can do something else with that extra fabric. So I can't show you the measurements for the blocks because you need to purchase the pattern, but I can show you the pieces for the blocks so that you can see how each block is put together. So these are the pieces that I have cut from each of my 15 fabrics. So again, because I need 30 blocks, I did go ahead and cut 2 10 inch squares from each of my fat quarters, and those are these pieces here, and then these 2 strips here are my background fabric. So this is what makes up each of our blocks, and then you just sew all of these pieces together. So I'm going to go ahead and sew everything together, and then I will go ahead and press my seams. Now the pattern doesn't specify which way to press the seams, it just says press the seams. So I will most likely press these seams here towards the printed fabric, and then same thing with these seams here, press them towards the printed fabric, just because I am using white and I don't generally like to be able to see the seam behind the white fabric. So that is most likely which direction I will press my seams. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready to sew all of these together. Alright, so I finished sewing all of my pieces together to make each of my blocks, and here is what one of the blocks looks like. So I think it came out super duper cute. And so the next part of the quilt process, so it does say to go ahead and add the sashing between the blocks, but I think I want to do my layout first to figure out which colors I want to put where, and then once I determine that, then I think I'll be able to add my sashing. But I did want to mention, so none of my prints that I'm using today are directional, and when I say directional, that means like if there is like a tree on your fabric, if your tree fabric, all the trees are going in one direction, so like down here is the bottom and up here is the top, every tree is in the proper direction, that is a directional fabric. So if you were to use that tree fabric to do this quilt, part of the process of making this particular pattern is once you sew your block together like this and you do your layout, one block will be like this, and then the one next to it is going to be like this. So instead of it being this way, it actually gets turned. So if you cut your fabric like this and all of your trees are top up here, bottom down here, when you turn your fabric, now all of your trees are going this way instead of standing up and down. I hope that makes sense. So when you are doing this pattern, before you cut out, or if you're using 10 inch by 10 inch squares, before you start doing any of your cutting, consider which direction that block is going to go and make sure that you orient the fabric in the right direction before you do your cutting. So because none of my fabric is directional, I don't have to worry about that, but I did want to mention it in case you love this pattern and you want to do it and then you don't realize until you're actually laying it out that your directional fabric is now sideways or upside down or whatever it might be. So keep that in mind when you're doing this pattern. So now, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and lay out my blocks and figure out how I want to do my layout, and then we'll go ahead and add the sashing. So let's go ahead and start laying everything out. Alright, so I've done my first layout. I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to stick with this particular layout, but this is kind of the first thing that I had in my mind, so I figured I'd give it a try. So I've laid everything out, making sure to keep most of my colors separated so I don't have like two blues right next to each other or two yellows right next to each other. And what I also did was I took pictures of my layout. I did two pictures. I did one in full color and then I did one using the black and white filter. So let me show you that now. So this is the first picture that I took here, and this is in full color. And I've said it in previous videos that for some reason looking at a picture of the layout, even if you're right in front of it, looking at a picture, I don't know, it lets me be able to see things that for some reason I don't see right in front of me. So I did this first picture, and I mean, it looks okay so far. I mean, I feel like I do want to move a couple of blocks around. Like, I think these two blocks here are pretty light color scale wise, so I feel like I might want to move those around a little bit. But let me go ahead and show you the black and white picture I took. So this is it on a black and white filter, and this is where you can really see like the color value as far as does it read darker or does it read lighter. And I think this is very handy just to make sure, like I said, you don't have like all of your darker color blocks all in like one area together. And then it kind of, I mean, you might not initially notice it with your eye, but something might be seeming off in your mind, even if you can't put your finger on it. So this is what it looks like with the black and white filter. I did go ahead and flip-flop this block with this block because this one was right here, and I thought these two colors here were too similar. They're both on the lighter scale of the color wheel, so I did go ahead and switch those two right there around. But otherwise, I like this layout, so now I can go ahead and add my sashing pieces. And the sashing pieces will go between each block here, only on the inside, so I don't need to add the sashing pieces to the outside edges because I do have border pieces that I will be adding instead. So the sashing will just go, essentially I'm going to put a piece of sashing on the right side of every block except for the far right hand column, and then I don't need to add anything underneath or above them because again we do have longer strips that we'll be sewing in there. So for right now I just need to add one piece of sashing to the right side of all of my blocks except for the right hand row. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Alright, so I've sewn all of my blocks together with the sashing between each of them. So now the next part of the pattern is to go ahead and do the long sashing, or the sashing that goes from left to right. So you can see up at the very top of the quilt and then the first row down, I did go ahead and lay out my sashing strips. So I did have to piece my sashing strips because the quilt is wider than your regular length of fabric. So the fabric yardage that I'm using is your typical 44 inches. This quilt top is wider than that. My measurements so far are 56 inches, so I did have to piece that. So now I just need to lay out the rest of my fabric strips for my sashing, and then I can go ahead and sew the sashing to each of these long strips now, and then I can go ahead and sew them all together. So now the pattern does not specify which direction to press the seams for the sashing. So I will most likely go ahead and press the seams towards the printed or the colored fabric instead of towards the sashing strips. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and lay everything out and then we'll go ahead and get it sewn together. Alright, so I have added all of my sashing pieces between all of my rows. I went ahead and added all of my border pieces as well. And for the sashing pieces between the rows, I did go ahead and press all of the seams towards each of the blocks. This way you wouldn't see it in the white fabric there. Now granted, you can see the seams of the pieces of sashing between the blocks, like here and here. You can see that. I mean, it's white fabric, so you're going to see it a little bit. But where I can, I did try to make sure I pressed it towards the printed fabric. And then for my border pieces going around the entire quilt, for those, instead of trying to fight with the seam to go towards the printed fabric, I just went ahead and pressed that seam out towards the white border. It was just easier than trying to fight with the seams. So all of that is done now. So it is ready to go ahead and be put on the long arm, so I can go ahead and get it quilted up. So now again, the size of this throw size quilt is bigger than your standard yard of fabric, which the yardage that I'm using is 44 inches by obviously 36 inches per yard. So I did have to piece my backing fabric, so I do have that done already. And again, I am using the Riley white fabric. It is just a basic stark white fabric. So I will go ahead, get my backing fabric loaded on the frame, get my batting, and then also get my quilt top loaded on. And then I have picked out a super cute pantograph pattern for this, so let me go ahead and show that to you now. So this is the pantograph pattern that I have picked out for our quilt top. So when I look at this quilt top, all of the different colors, the vibrancy of the colors, when I look at it, I think of like Skittles or Starbursts, just because the colors are so pretty and vibrant. And so I originally wanted to try and find some kind of pattern that was, I don't know, reminiscent of candy, but I didn't really find anything that I liked. So then I started thinking of like butterflies and cute little flowers, and I found this pattern here. So this is called Spring Beauty, and let me zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. There you go. All right, so this is called Spring Beauty. This is from Urban Elements. I did the self-print option. So I went ahead and printed out my pattern, and this is a 2-page pattern. So the 2 pages consist of, this is 1 page right here, and then this is 1 page right here. So it's a 2-page pattern. I got it all taped together and ready to go. So yeah, I saw this, I liked the little butterflies, I liked the little flowers. It has a little bit of greenery with the leaves here. So I thought this would be a really cute pattern for this particular quilt top. And I think the large size of the butterflies and the flower, I think they'll really show on this quilt top because we do have some larger blocks there. So I think this will show up very nicely on that. So the last thing that I needed to figure out or pick for this particular quilt top was the color of thread I was going to use on the top of the quilt. So there are a lot of colors with all of the different batik fabrics here. So I was thinking of using a super colorful thread. So I pulled out, I have this 4 thread cone pack here from Superior Threads. This is so fine. It is a polyester thread, and I really like using the Superior threads, specifically the polyester threads, because the lint is almost non-existent. So I really do prefer the polyesters over the cotton. So I pulled out this colorful thread set here, and these are the colors that come in this particular thread set. So again, super colorful really. And you know, I was looking at them and I laid out like my pink thread here, and I didn't quite like how it looked with some of the colors. And that, you know, and I was just looking at all of the different colors that come with it. So like this green one would look really good on the green fabric, but not necessarily on like this kind of peachy orangey fabric right here. So I didn't want to go with the green. Same thing with the purple. The purple would look really good on this pinkish purple fabric here, but not necessarily with like the yellow or the green or even this peachy fabric, orangey fabric here. And then same thing with the yellow. I couldn't decide on a color that would really look good with everything here. I had considered a variegated thread, but I didn't have any on hand to lay out against the fabric. And at the risk of, you know, buying a variegated thread that wouldn't end up working, I decided against going with a variegated. So instead, I'm going to be using, this is a Superior Threads, this is Omni, so this is not the So Fine, but this is an Omni thread, still from Superior Threads. This is silver, so this is number 3022. And let me pull some off of the cone here for you. So now I consider this just a gray thread, and I know a lot of people might be thinking gray for a colorful top like this, that it might not go, but actually that is very opposite. So because it is a lighter gray, it's not going to necessarily stand out on any one particular color. So like it'll just kind of blend right in with all of the different colors of fabric. So let me zoom in here and you can see it a little bit closer. So right here, so I've got it laid across this fabric here, and it just kind of melts right into the fabric. And even if I spread it out over, you know, the different variations, because obviously we've got a lot of colors in this one little strip here, I mean, it doesn't really stand out. I mean, obviously you can see it. Hopefully you can see it in the camera there. Yeah, I think you can. So I like that it just is able to melt into all of the different fabric colors. So I'll show you here on the green. We'll just lay that out right there. So again, it just kind of melts right in with the green, and then same thing with the yellow. I know there's not a lot of yellow for you to see here, but it just blends right in. And then obviously lastly with this peachy orange color here, again, blends right in. And while we can see it more so while we're looking at it, you know, just laid out on top, once the stitching gets into the fabric, it's really almost going to become non-existent. You will see the quilting pattern from the pantograph, but you're not necessarily going to see the thread itself. So I really do like that about using this particular gray. And this is actually the fabric, or this is the thread that I use to do all of my piecing. So I use this in my bobbin and on my thread cone to do all of my piecing for all of my work. So, you know, be it a dark fabric or a light fabric, this thread is perfect for that. And I really like it for the quilting too, when it comes to a quilt like this where there's so many different colors. So I will be using this Omni thread on the top, and I will also be using it in the bobbin. So, you know, again, when you lay it across the white fabric, it's gonna blend right in, especially, you know, once the stitching is in place. You're going to see the pattern, but you're not going to necessarily see the thread. So this is the thread that I'm going to be using today for the top, and my bobbin thread for the quilting. So now all that's left to do is get this loaded up on the frame and get the quilting going. So I'm going to go ahead and get this ready to go. Alright, so here is the completed quilt. I love how this came out. I love the colors. And once it's completely done with the binding on it, it really does make me think of Skittles or Starburst candy. So again, this is the squared up quilt pattern by Cotton and Joy. This particular quilt is the throw size. For the squared up quilt pattern, you can make it in the baby size, throw size, twin size, or queen size. So this quilt pattern is fat quarter friendly as well as 10-inch square friendly. You can also use yardage, which is what I did. So I ordered a half yard of each of my prints, and I cut it in half so that I had 2 fat quarters from each half yard, and I used 1 fat quarter for this particular quilt pattern from all of my 15 prints. So I was able to get 2 10-inch squares from each of my fat quarter pieces of fabric. So I have 2 of each colored square. Again, the particular fabric collection that I use today is called Sorbet Sundaes. It is a batik collection from Riley Blake Designs. So for the Sorbet Sundaes fabric collection, there are 24 prints. I selected 15 for the main body of my quilt, and then I did go ahead and go with another print from the same collection for my binding. So total, I have 16 prints from the Sorbet Sundaes fabric collection. So I always recommend getting a fat quarter bundle for all of the projects that I do, because it gives you a piece of every print in that collection so that you don't have to go and buy individual yardage. Getting a fat quarter bundle will give you a little bit of the entire collection, and all the projects that I do are normally fat quarter friendly. So let me show you some close-up shots of the quilting from the quilt pattern that I selected for this quilt. So here is the butterfly, and we've got the foliage, the little greenery leaves right here next to it, as well as a couple of the flowers. So I think the quilt pattern came out very, very nicely, and you can really see here looking at it, the gray thread just melts right in. So that is one of the reasons why I really love using this gray silver thread from Superior Threads. It's a perfect color for quilt tops that have a multitude of colors, where you can't necessarily go with like a dark thread or a light thread or even necessarily a super colorful thread. This silver just really blends in nicely with all of the different colors. This is the Superior thread that I used for the top of my quilt and in my bobbin. So again, this is an Omni thread, and it is color silver, and it's number 3022. So let me show you a close-up of the thread I used in my binding. So I was able to find a beautiful blue thread, and this is actually, it might be hard to tell in the camera, but it's like a glossy thread, so it's kind of got a shine to it. And honestly, it would be great for embroidery as well. So the thread that I used for my binding is another Superior Threads. This is a Magnifico, and it's color 2161. And this is what it looks like. So already, even just in the camera, you can see that it has like this really beautiful shine, glossiness to it. And that's why I think this would also make a really good embroidery thread. So this is the thread that I used to top stitch my binding. So I find the best way to really see a quilt pattern is to put a little bit of shadow on it. So I've moved the light over to the side so that you can really see the shadow from the quilting itself. So let me go ahead and zoom you in. So again, there's the butterfly. We have a couple of foliage leaves right here, and then our cute little flowers right next to it, and then the pattern starts over again with another butterfly. So I think the quilt pattern came out super duper cute, and it is definitely more noticeable on the back of the quilt than the front, but you can still see some of the details on the front. So I really like this particular pattern for this quilt. So here is the quilt pattern still on the back of the quilt, but I've zoomed it way in so that you can see the silver thread that I used in the top and the bobbin for this quilt. You can see how it really just blends right in with the white fabric. It doesn't stand out, it's not too dark, it's not too light. It looks really good with all different colors of fabric, honestly. So that is it for today's video. Hopefully y'all liked this video tutorial of the squared up quilt pattern by Cotton & Joy using the Sorbet Sundaes Fabric Batik collection from Riley Blake Designs. If you're interested in getting the quilt pattern or a fat quarter bundle of this collection, or any of the threads that I used in today's video, I do have the links for everything in the description down below, so make sure to check that out. If you liked today's video, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber to my YouTube channel yet, please make sure you do so by hitting the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I will see you all later.